Trigger warning: sensitive topics are discussed in this video. Viewer discretion is advised. Chai is unquestionably the heartbeat of Indian life. It is offered to guests, brewed at roadside stalls, and sipped in quiet corners in every home. India is among the top tea producing countries in the world, and Assam alone contributes more than half of the nation's total tea output. But behind the staggering numbers lies the tireless labor of Assam's tea garden workers, a multi-ethnic, multicultural community whose contribution has long been overlooked. They have been working for generations to ensure that every morning millions of Indians start their day with a cup of tea. But behind the familiar taste of chai lies a history most of us were never taught. A history of deception, exploitation, and unimaginable suffering. In the lush green valleys of Assam, thousands of men, women, and even children were lured from their homes with promises of land, equality, good wages, and most importantly, a better life. Instead, they were faced with the brutal reality of the planter Raj, locked into contracts they couldn't escape, forced to work in suffocating conditions, punished and forgotten by history. This is the untold story of the tea workers of Assam, and it's time we remember it. But before we move on to the story of the tea workers, let us first find out why and how it all started. Before tea became India's drink, it was Britain's obsession. In the early 1700s and early 1800s, Britain imported huge quantities of tea from China, and soon it became a daily necessity in Britain. This Chinese tea was not just a luxury, it had become a part of the working class life by the early 1800s. The British were also exporting other goods like silk and porcelain from China. However, China wasn't interested in British goods, so British were forced to pay China in silver, and this ended up creating a one-way flow of wealth out of Britain and into China. The British Empire was therefore desperate to find an alternative to the Chinese tea import. So when Robert Bruce, a Scottish explorer and merchant who first came to Assam in the 1820s, heard about the drink consumed by the Simpos, which sounded a little similar to the tea he had known, he met the chief Bisagam and soon confirmed that the drink was in fact tea. However, in 1824 he died, and before he could follow up on his discovery, his younger brother Charles Alexander Bruce took it upon himself to carry forward the legacy. A decade later, in 1834, the British formed the Tea Committee under Governor General William Bentinck. It included botanists, traders, and company officials, all focused on one mission: to study the cultivation of tea in Assam. They tested the Chinese tea varieties in the native Assamese plants, and the results were clear. The wild tea growing in Upper Assam was genuine. In fact, in their letters to Lord William Bentinck, the Tea Committee declared this discovery to be the most important and valuable in matters connected to the agricultural and commercial resources of the empire. The British now had what they needed: land, climate, and a plan. All that remained was labor. The tea industry demanded a large number of labor because it was not just about transforming the fresh tea leaves into a dried beverage. It's a labor-intensive process which included clearing jungles, leveling soil, pruning leaves, etc. So at the very beginning, Chinese experts were brought in. Although the Chinese workers had agreed to tasks like planting, pruning, and processing tea, they drew the line at the kind of heavy labor the British expected. On top of that, many of them fell sick in the unfamiliar land and died. Those who survived demanded better conditions and fairer wages, things the British had no intention of offering. So, by the 1860s, the Chinese tea workers had completely disappeared from the tea plantations of Assam. The British did try to hire the local Assamese people to work in their tea plantations. However, the Assamese people were unwilling to do so because they did not find the kind of wage labor attractive, especially when the wages were so low. They preferred to work in their own fields and enjoy a self-sustainable economy. The only exception was when they were in urgent need of cash. Only then did they work in the plantations, and it was only for a couple of months at best. The British also tried to hire the people of other indigenous tribes such as the Naga people. However, they were deemed unsuitable to work as they were too few in number and refused to work for longer periods of time. So the British slowly extended their search for labor to the other parts of the Indian subcontinent and soon found themselves set upon the poverty-ridden areas of Bengal, Bihar, Chotanagpur, Odisha, and so on. This was where the brutal history of the present-day tea garden labor community of Assam began. During this period, areas like Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, Chotanagpur, and others were neck-deep in poverty. Natural calamities like floods, famines, lack of employment opportunities, and the extreme oppression and degradation faced at the hands of the higher caste were among the many factors that made the lower caste people in these areas desperate for employment opportunities in other areas, and this exact desperation was well exploited by the British planters. Now that the British had finally found where to get their labor from, the next question was how to actually bring them in. That's where the very organized and often coercive system of labor recruitment comes in. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top sat the labor recruitment agencies, controlling the entire flow of workers into Assam. Just below the agencies in the recruitment pyramid were the Arakatis and the Sardars. The Arakatis were professional native recruiters hired directly by the labor agencies. They entered even the most remote villages and charmed the simple-minded people with their sweet words and charming personality. The Arakatis filled the ears of the poor, deprived, and desperate people with stories of a faraway land where jobs were plenty, the work was light, and the pay was glorious. And the people believed them. These people were then sent off to the tea plantations of Assam. The Sardars, on the other hand, were regular laborers already working in the gardens, but they were given a special role. They could recruit their own relatives and friends to join them as workers. In return, the Sardars were given special benefits such as better housing, better wages, and a little more power than the normal workers. Now, mind you, these were the legal or more official ways of labor recruitment. However, kidnapping and human trafficking, especially of women and children, was also used, especially during the early years of the tea industry when demand for labor was at its peak. Laborers were then transported to cities like Calcutta, where coolie depots were located. These depots are located next on the recruitment pyramid and act as the processing hubs from where the laborers were sent off to Assam. The journey to the depots were often by steamer ships, and the journey itself took many weeks. The conditions on these steamers were heinous, as the sanitary needs and precautions were being ignored. Thus, death rates were as high as 20 to 50%, mostly due to cholera outbreaks in the unhygienic conditions. Men and women were crammed together on overcrowded steamers with no separate arrangements for privacy or safety. And what happened during the nights was even more disturbing. Reports revealed that steamer staff often carried out heinous acts, especially targeting women, acts that were rarely punished and mostly hidden. The bodies of the deceased were casually thrown overboard. The depots were no better. The conditions remained same. Thousands of people were crammed into small spaces and kept there for several days, sometimes weeks at a time. People continued to die. All of this, along with the rampant kidnapping and coercive recruitment carried out by the Arakatis and Sardars, soon found its way into British and in fact some Indian nationalist newspapers, which forced the British to take the matter seriously, and as such, Act 3 of 1863 and Act 13 of 1882 were passed. These acts introduced the notorious indenture system of penal contract, by which the laborers were recruited under a written contract typically of 3 to 5 years. These laws also made it a requirement for the laborers to be registered with a registering officer before being sent to work in the tea plantation. These registration officers made sure that the laborers were aware of where they were going, what work they were going to do, what kind of wages they will receive, and so on and so forth. And most importantly, kept record of the people who were in fact being recruited as laborers. On paper, it did look like the British were reforming the tea labor system in Assam. Big laws were being passed, contracts were being signed, everything was being legalized. It all sounded good. In fact, a little too good. But let's be real. These were not at all reforms. Most workers did not know how to read and write and therefore did not know what kind of contracts they were signing, and the recruiters often lied, forged details, and coached the laborers on how to answer the registering officers. The recruiters continued to lie, coerce, and traffic, now just with legal cover. Deaths were still occurring in thousands on the ships, and if a coolie did try to escape the plantation or the coolie depot because of the horrendous conditions they were forced to live in, they were arrested, fined, and even jailed. But even for those who survived, the nightmare didn't end there. The coolies who managed to survive the hellish steamer journey and endure the suffocating conditions in the depots were eventually processed and sent off to various tea plantations across Assam, by rail, by ship, and sometimes even on foot. And soon, these innocent people found themselves trapped in a reality of misery, suffering, and spine-breaking labor. The workers stayed in so-called coolie lines located near the tea gardens, which were nothing but rows of thatched hovels with cracked walls, leaky roofs, and damp floors. These living quarters could barely be called homes. They had to sleep on the floors or on beds of bamboo that they themselves made. The unsanitary and damp conditions made the perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which made malaria a massive problem. This led to a very high death rate among the workers, especially in the first few months after arrival. When it came to the actual labor in the tea plantations, the work was divided pretty rigidly. Men were mostly made to do the planting, while women and even children were burdened with repetitive tasks like nursery work, plucking tea leaves, and basic maintenance. They had to work 6 or even 7 days a week and somewhere around 9 to 12 hours a day. The conditions that they were forced to live in were inhumane. The water was contaminated and the food was barely enough to survive on, let alone work for long hours in the heat. What's worse was that this wasn't even accidental neglect. Many tea planters deliberately restricted food rations. Their twisted logic? That giving workers proper food would make them lazy or sleepy. Even pregnant women weren't spared. They were made to work on near empty stomachs, all in the name of productivity. Even after days of back-breaking labor under the harsh sun, the workers barely returned to their cramped huts with a coin in hand. Their wages were so meager it was impossible to feed their families, let alone dream of saving anything. With no choice, they borrowed from the very planters, but no matter how much they worked, they could never repay their debt. And so what began as a temporary contract turned into a lifelong sentence. The coolies never left the plantations. In fact, in the research article, Tea and Money versus Human Life, the Rise and Fall of the Indenture System in the Assam Tea Plantations, 1840 to 1908, it is mentioned that during the fierce debate in 1901 over a nominal wage increase for indentured labor in Assam tea gardens, a planters representative in the Central Legislative Council of India said, and I quote, "When the coolie goes to a garden, he begins to receive a wage and begins to live, whereas in Chota Nagpur, he only exists." End of quote. Basically implying that they had somehow rescued or civilized the workers who had come from a primitive and impoverished area like Chota Nagpur. And also this whole "we rescued them, we civilized them, so we own them" argument is used by the English planters to justify every single atrocity that they committed on the workers. Moreover, the workers were forced to live in isolation and were alienated. They were not allowed to go out of their gardens. People of different tribes were placed in different coolie lines, and communication with coolies of different tea plantations was restricted. This was basically a tactic of control to prevent the formation of unions, which may lead to protests and uprisings. The isolation, meager wages, disgusting living conditions, back-breaking labor, lack of proper food and water often became unbearable for the helpless workers, so they tried to run away. Following this, the Workmen's Breach of Contract Law 1859 was passed because of the increased number of desertations in not only tea plantations, but also in railway and industrial labor. By this law, the runaways were allowed to be taken to court, jailed, or arrested without a warrant by the planters. Moreover, in order to keep the number of runaways in check, chowkidars were employed. Hillmen were paid to track down the runaways. Even if runaway worker did somehow manage to bypass it all and board a ship, he was arrested by the policemen there and returned to the planters. A runaway worker was a traitor, an ungrateful bastard who had done the great sin of betraying his master, who had graciously provided him the opportunity to lead a dignified life. And so he was flogged, very often till the worker died. There has been multiple written accounts which clearly mentions that flogging was the most common form of discipline used by the planters. Although flogging was not technically legal, still little was done about it because the law in most cases favored the planters and the European authorities. And most importantly, to the planters, it appeared quite natural that the laborers who deserted or disobeyed should be flogged. After all, they had paid so much money for these laborers to be brought to work in their gardens, and how dare the workers try to escape the hell that they had been confined to. Moving on further into the video, to all my viewers, I would like to inform you that I will talk briefly about the female laborers specifically in this section. Honestly, at first I was not quite sure if I should include this part at all because women workers have historically faced severe mistreatment in manual labor industries like the tea plantations since colonial times. And I could honestly make a whole video talking just about the mistreatment of the women workers that they had to face at the hands of the capitalists. But I felt like it would be unfair to not mention them at all. So this entire topic itself is quite vast and I will only include the most common issues faced without going too much into detail. Now, the indentured labor system in Assam's tea plantations was one of the earliest large-scale instances where women were systematically recruited for manual wage labor outside the home in colonial India. And there were two main reasons for it. First of all, the British found that if they hired male workers individually, they had a higher tendency to run away. But if they hired entire families, they were forced to settle down. Secondly, the presence of women ensured a natural increase in the number of workers because women equal children, which equal more labor force. However, the women workers were abused in every way possible. They were paid less for the same amount of work as men. They were often beaten and sexually abused by their husbands and other male workers. They were also often raped by the planters and European managers. Women were forced to work even during pregnancy or after miscarriages and were often flogged, confined, or expelled if they were unable to do so. So this is where I will end today's video. I have tried my best to share the story of the tea garden workers as honestly and clearly as I could. I have also done my best to keep all the information factually accurate. But if you do come across any discrepancies, I sincerely apologize. If you would like to dive deeper or get a more expert perspective, I have linked all the research articles and papers I referred to in the description box below. And lastly, if you like the video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.